The blinding glare of fluorescent lights washed over the emergency room. Alarm screamed. Nurses darted back and forth, their faces drenched in panic. "Doctor, he's crashing. Quick, move him to trauma bed 3 now." The man on the gurney, motionless, pale, was fighting for his life. His body jerked violently as nurses struggled to restrain him. A blister, grotesque and swollen, pulsed on his back like something alive, bulging as though it might burst at any second. Heart rate dropping fast, 40-35. Shouted the nurse at the monitor. "Scalpel," the lead surgeon barked, his voice cutting through the chaos like steel. Hands trembled. Gloves snapped. Instruments clattered on metal trays. The air was thick with fear, antiseptic, and adrenaline. "Doctor, what I ask that thing?" "It's moving," one young intern whispered, her voice cracking. The surgeon's eyes narrowed, sweat dripping down his forehead. "I don't know," he muttered under his breath. "But if we don't act now, he's gone." The room erupted in motion. A syringe plunged. The defibrillator pads slapped onto his chest. Charged to 200. Clear. His body jolted, bounced, then fell limp again. The monitor gave a chilling flatline tone. No pulse, we're losing him. The surgeon's hands hovered above the pulsating blister. For a moment, even he froze. Everyone in the room stared, holding their breath, waiting for his next move. Then, with a single slice of the scalpel, the blister burst, and what came out made the entire room recoil in horror. A nurse screamed. Another stumbled back, covering her mouth. Even the doctor, a man who had seen countless tragedies, stood frozen. Because what poured out wasn't blood. It was something else. Something that should never have been inside a human body. One click from you equals endless motivation for me. Please subscribe. And what the doctors found inside left everyone frozen in fear. The blister had ruptured, but instead of a simple release of pus or blood, a thick, dark fluid oozed out, like tar mixed with oil. It clung to the surgeon's gloves, stringy and foul-smelling. The stench hit the room instantly. "Oh my God!" whispered the nurse, gagging as she turned her head away. But it wasn't just the fluid. Beneath it, something writhed. "Doctor, it's moving again!" cried the intern, stepping back, her face pale. The surgeon steadied himself. Retractors. Now. Metal arms pried the wound open. The blister's cavity was larger than anyone imagined, far deeper than the skin should allow. The scalpel sliced through layers of decayed tissue. A hollow pocket had formed inside his back, stretching almost unnaturally wide, as if it had been growing silently for months, maybe years. "Lights closer. I need to see what's in there," the surgeon barked. The team obeyed, bringing the lamp down until its harsh beam illuminated the inside of the gaping blister. And that's when they all froze. There was movement, tiny, frantic twitching, like something alive was packed inside, desperate to get out. The surgeon's hands trembled for the first time in years. Forceps. He reached in, his gloved fingers brushing against something hard. He pinched it and pulled. Slowly, something foreign emerged, dark, jagged, and alien against the pale flesh of the patient's back. Gasps filled the room. A young nurse whispered, That's not human." But before anyone could process what they were seeing, the patient's monitor let out a piercing alarm. Heart rate dropping, 20. "He's not breathing," shouted the nurse. The surgeon dropped the object onto the tray with a metallic clang. He grabbed the patient's chest and began compressions. "Don't you dare die on me now," he growled. The room spun into chaos once more. Tools clattered. Meds were slammed into syringes. The man's body convulsed under the relentless rhythm of CPR. But nothing was working. The monitor let out a chilling flat line. Everyone froze. Was this the end? The room shook with tension as the flat line blared like a death bell. "Code blue!" shouted the nurse, her voice cracking as she sprinted to the crash cart. The patient's body lay lifeless, his skin pale, his chest refusing to rise. The strange black fluid still dripped from the open blister on his back, pooling on the sterile sheets like spilled ink. The surgeons, seasoned by decades of emergencies, were rattled. None of them had ever seen anything like this. "Doctor, he's gone," whispered the intern, trembling. No, not yet. The lead surgeon's voice thundered. Adrenaline. Now! A syringe stabbed into the man's chest. The plunger went down hard. His body jerked violently. Clear. The defibrillator paddles pressed against his chest. A high-pitched whine, then a brutal shock surged through him. His body lifted off the bed before slamming back down. The monitor flickered. Nothing. Still flat. Again. 300 joules. Clear. Another jolt. The man's head snapped back. His arms stiffened like iron rods. Still nothing. Nurses exchanged fearful glances. One of them whispered, "Maybe it's better if we let him go." The surgeon's jaw clenched. Sweat streamed down his temples. His hands trembled but didn't stop compressions. "Not on my table. Not like this." "Doctor, his oxygen saturation is 0. Another nurse warned, tears brimming in her eyes. "Keep pushing." The surgeon barked, slamming down on the chest again and again, fighting against the inevitable. The sound of cracking ribs filled the air. Then suddenly, beep, the faintest blip on the monitor. Another, and another. "He's back!" shouted a nurse, relief and disbelief colliding in her voice. The team erupted in frantic action. Oxygen mask sealed tighter, for drip adjusted, suction clearing the dark fluid. The surgeon exhaled heavily, his hands finally stilling. He looked down at the man, still unconscious but alive, and then at the grotesque wound on his back. Whatever was inside, that blister hadn't just been killing him. It had almost succeeded. And yet, they had only pulled out a fragment of it. What else was hiding deep inside his body? The room shook with tension as the flat line blared like a death bell. "Code blue!" shouted the nurse, her voice cracking as she sprinted to the crash cart. The patient's body lay lifeless, his skin pale, his chest refusing to rise. The strange black fluid still dripped from the open blister on his back, pooling on the sterile sheets like spilled ink. The surgeons, seasoned by decades of emergencies, were rattled. None of them had ever seen anything like this. "Doctor, he's gone," whispered the intern, trembling. "No, not yet." The lead surgeon's voice thundered. Adrenaline. Now! A syringe stabbed into the man's chest. The plunger went down hard. His body jerked violently. Clear. The defibrillator paddles pressed against his chest. A high-pitched whine, then a brutal shock surged through him. His body lifted off the bed before slamming back down. The monitor flickered. Nothing. Still flat. Again. 300 joules. Clear. Another jolt. The man's head snapped back. His arms stiffened like iron rods. Still nothing. Nurses exchanged fearful glances. One of them whispered, "Maybe it's better if we let him go." The surgeon's jaw clenched. Sweat streamed down his temples. His hands trembled but didn't stop compressions. "Not on my table. Not like this." "Doctor, his oxygen saturation is 0. Another nurse warned, tears brimming in her eyes. "Keep pushing." The surgeon barked, slamming down on the chest again and again, fighting against the inevitable. The sound of cracking ribs filled the air. Then suddenly, beep, the faintest blip on the monitor. Another, and another. "He's back!" shouted a nurse, relief and disbelief colliding in her voice. The team erupted in frantic action. Oxygen mask sealed tighter, for drip adjusted, suction clearing the dark fluid. The surgeon exhaled heavily, his hands finally stilling. He looked down at the man, still unconscious but alive, and then at the grotesque wound on his back. Whatever was inside, that blister hadn't just been killing him. It had almost succeeded. And yet, they had only pulled out a fragment of it. What else was hiding deep inside his body? Long before the sterile lights and screaming alarms, his life was simple. His name was Rashid, a man in his late 40s, a quiet soul who rarely spoke more than necessary. At home, he was a father, a provider. His hands, callous and worn, told the story of a man who worked tirelessly to keep food on the table. He had 2 children, a daughter who adored him, always clinging to his arm, and a teenage son who looked at him like he was invincible. "Abba, you'll come to my match this time, right?" His son had asked one evening, his eyes bright with hope. Rashid had smiled softly, hiding his exhaustion. Of course, Beta. I wouldn't miss it. And his wife, Aisha, she knew his strength, but she also knew his silence. She had watched him wince when he bent down to tie his shoes, had seen him shift uncomfortably at night when the lump on his back first began to grow. "Please, Rashid," she had pleaded one evening as they sat under the dim light of their kitchen. "Go see a doctor. It's not normal." But Rashid shook his head. "It's just a blister. It will go away." He always brushed it aside, refusing to show weakness. His family relied on him. He could not afford time away from work, nor the shame of being seen as sick. Yet, behind closed doors, his daughter would hug him tighter every night, whispering, "Don't leave us, Abba." And he would force a smile, even as the pain gnawed deeper into his back, spreading its claws further with every passing week. The blister grew. The pain worsened. But Rashid carried on, at work, at home, pretending everything was fine. Until one evening, his wife found him collapsed in their living room, unconscious, his shirt soaked in dark stains. That was the night he was rushed to the hospital, the night their world shattered. And now, as the doctors fought for his life, his family waited just outside those doors, clinging to hope, unaware of the nightmare that lay inside his body. The operating room was silent, eerily silent, except for the faint beeping of the heart monitor. The surgeon's gloved hand hovered above the gaping wound, his eyes fixed on the dark cavity inside Rashid's back. "Retractors wider," he ordered, his voice low, steady but heavy with dread. The metal arms pulled the torn flesh apart. A smell hit them, rotting, foul, unlike anything human. Nurses gagged. One pressed a hand over her mask. "Doctor, there's something moving," the intern whispered, her face ghostly pale. The surgeon leaned closer, light shining deep into Blister's hollow. And then he saw it. Something shifted. A ripple. And then it emerged. The forceps gripped it first, a long, stringy, worm-like mass coated in slime. The surgeon pulled, the resistance squelching as if it were anchored deep inside. Inch by inch, it slid out, glistening under the light, writhing like it still lived. A nurse screamed. Another staggered back, nearly dropping a tray. "Oh my God, it's a parasite," someone cried. But it wasn't just one. As soon as the first was yanked free, another wriggled to the surface, pushing against the torn flesh, eager to escape. And then another. Within seconds, the cavity was writhing, packed with pale, squirming creatures, each one slithering, coiling, sliding out his body as if Rashid had been their host. The intern covered her mouth, eyes wide with horror. This is impossible. The surgeon's face was ashen, but his hands did not stop. He pulled, extracted, dropped them into the metal basin. The clang of the tray echoed with every wriggling parasite that landed inside. Clang, clang, clang. The basin filled with them. Dozens. Their bodies writhed, coiling over one another, alive, fighting for space. "What the hell is this?" whispered the nurse, backing away until she hit the wall. The surgeon shook his head. "Parasitic infestation. But this isn't like anything I've ever seen. They shouldn't survive like this. Not inside a man. Not in these numbers." Rashid's body convulsed on the table. The monitor spiked, heart rate racing dangerously. The infestation had triggered a violent reaction. "Stabilize him. Suction now." The surgeon roared, sweat dripping from his face as more and more of the grotesque creatures slithered out of Rashid's back. The team fought against chaos, some extracting, some resuscitating, all while the room reeked of decay and infection. By the time the last of them was removed, the basin overflowed with worms, a nightmarish mass that writhed in unison, as if angry at being taken from their host. The surgeon ripped off his gloves, his chest heaving. He stared at Rashid's pale, unconscious body, and whispered the words no one ever expected to hear in a hospital. He was carrying a nest. Weeks later, when Rashid finally opened his eyes in the ICU, he didn't remember much of the chaos in the operating room, but he did remember when it all started. It was months ago, during a long summer of endless overtime shifts. Rashid had taken a second job at a warehouse on the edge of the city. The place was damp, poorly lit, crawling with insects. He often worked late into the night, lifting, bending, carrying loads heavier than his body should endure. One evening, he felt something sting him. Just a sharp prick on his back, nothing more. He slapped at it, brushed it off, and kept working. Days later, a blister appeared. He thought little of it. He'd grown up tough, scratches, cuts, infections. He'd lived through all of it. It will heal, he told himself. But this one didn't. It grew, slowly at first, then faster. Sometimes, when he pressed on it, he swore he felt something shift inside. But the thought of going to a doctor terrified him. Medical bills would swallow what little he earned. He couldn't afford to miss work. His family needed him more than he needed treatment. So he hid it. He wrapped his torso in cloth every morning before leaving home, even when sweat soaked it through. He avoided intimacy with his wife, afraid she'd notice the swelling. At night, he turned his back against the wall, so no one would see. But the truth was darker than he ever imagined. That sting in the warehouse hadn't been nothing. It had been the beginning. A tiny egg, a parasite finding a home, and his refusal to face it had given it time. Time to multiply. Time to turn his body into a nest. Now, lying weak in a hospital bed, tears welled in Rashid's eyes as the surgeon explained what they had found. He had risked everything, his life, his family's future, because of fear and pride, and it had almost killed him. The story could not be contained within hospital walls. Within days, whispers became headlines. Man found alive with nest of parasites in his back. Doctors shocked by bizarre infestation. Reporters swarmed the hospital gates. Cameras flashing. Microphones shoved at anyone in a white coat. Some news anchors speculated it was a rare medical anomaly. Others leaned into sensationalism. Is this a sign of a new epidemic? Inside the hospital, the board launched an urgent investigation. How could parasites grow unchecked for so long inside a man's body? Demanded one official. Was it negligence? Did our doctors miss it in earlier checkups? The lead surgeon slammed his fist on the table. He never came to us until it was too late. Don't you dare blame my staff for what this man hid out of fear. But the controversy deepened. Rashid's employer, the warehouse, came under scrutiny. Workers stepped forward anonymously, describing unsanitary conditions, moldy walls, standing water, infestations of insects that thrived in the darkness. Soon, government inspectors arrived at the warehouse, sealing its gates with bold red tape. A police inquiry opened, investigating whether hazardous working environments had directly contributed to Rashid's nightmare. Meanwhile, activists took to the streets. How many more Rashids are suffering in silence? One protester shouted through a megaphone. How many workers risk their lives in filthy conditions while companies grow rich off their sweat? Aisha, standing quietly at Rashid's bedside, could only weep. She never wanted her husband's suffering to become a public spectacle. But now his name was everywhere. Strangers debated his choices, his illness, even his dignity. And Rashid himself, still too weak to speak more than a whisper, asked the only question that mattered. Will I survive this? Will I live long enough to hold my children again? The doctors couldn't answer. Not yet, because even though the parasites had been removed, the damage inside his body was far from over, and his fight for life was just beginning. Days passed in the ICU. Machines hummed and beeped. Tubes fed fluids into Rashid's fragile veins, and the steady hiss of oxygen filled the silence. His body was weak, scarred, and hollowed out by the infestation that had stolen months of his life. Doctors watched nervously. Infections were the greatest threat now. His immune system had been ravaged. Every hour was a gamble. Would his body fight back or surrender? One night, the monitor alarms blared again. His blood pressure plummeted. Nurses rushed in, panic surging through the ward. Doctor, we're losing him again. The surgeon, who had already fought death once for Rashid, raced to his side. Not tonight, he muttered, gripping Rashid's hand as if Shiro could anchor him to life. Epinephrine now! They worked frantically. Chest compressions. For drips adjusted. Oxygen increased. His pulse faltered, stopped, then flickered faintly. And then a miracle. A weak heartbeat returned. The line on the monitor danced again. The surgeon closed his eyes in relief, whispering under his breath, "Fight, Rashid, fight." For 2 more days, he hovered on the edge. Family members held vigils outside his room. His daughter pressed a small hand against the glass, whispering, "Please, Abba, come back." And then, on the morning of the 3rd day, something changed. His eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. His lips parted, and a hoarse whisper escaped. "Aisha!" His wife rushed in. Tears flooded her eyes as she clasped his hand. "I'm here, Rashid. I never left." For the first time in weeks, Rashid's chest lifted with a deep, steady breath. His children were allowed inside, clinging to his arms, sobbing into the hospital sheets. Against every medical prediction, against every odd, he had survived. The surgeon stood at the doorway, watching quietly, a faint smile on his tired face. Some men, he thought, aren't ready to leave this world just yet. Rashid had been a host of death itself, yet he had clawed his way back to life. But his survival came with a message, one the world would never forget. Weeks later, the hospital room no longer echoed with alarms or chaos. Instead, it was filled with the quiet murmur of family voices, the laughter of children, and the steady rhythm of a man slowly healing. Rashid sat upright in bed, frail but alive, his hand clasped tightly in Aisha's. His scar stretched across his back, a permanent reminder of the nightmare he had endured. But to him, it was more than a scar. It was a second chance. Doctors visited often, reminding him how close he had come to death. "Most men would not have survived this," the surgeon admitted softly. "You're here because of sheer willpower, and because you finally let us fight for you." Rashid lowered his eyes. He remembered every night he had ignored the pain. Every time he told his family he was fine. Every moment he chose silence over asking for help. And he knew the truth. His pride had almost left his children without a father, his wife without a husband. Now, when reporters asked him what lesson he had learned, Rashid's answer was simple, spoken in a voice still weak but steady. Never ignore the signs. Don't hide your pain. Health is not weakness. It's survival. If you love your family, don't let your fear or pride steal you away from them. His story spread further than anyone expected. For weeks, his name lit up news channels, social media feeds, and dinner table conversations. But it wasn't the parasites people remembered most. It was his warning, because Rashid's suffering carried a truth for everyone. Ignoring pain can cost you your life. Facing it can save it. And as he held his daughter close, whispering a promise never to leave again, one final line lingered like an echo. Sometimes the most dangerous thing inside us is silence.